Eddie Munson was always going to die. I always found strange in Stranger Things 4 was how upset people were when Eddie Munson died. I think partly it has to do with Metallica because like the band was very interactive with Eddie Munson's character, and because Eddie Munson played a Metallica song and there were t-shirts and everything, like commercially Eddie Munson I assume made both Metallica and the Stranger Things franchise a lot of money. But I always thought it was weird because the moment he was introduced and became like kind of like it became clear he was a reoccurring character, I knew he was gonna die. It wasn't very shocking to me, and I guess because I kind of already saw it coming from like the get-go that like I didn't understand why everyone was like torn into shreds and like so upset when Eddie Munson died, and there are now like Eddie Munson fan clubs that like show up on like my Facebook page, which has never happened before. No 11 or Will fan pages ever showed up, just advertising themselves on my like Facebook page or my For You page on TikTok, the same way that like Eddie Munson did. Like, he is such an anomaly in the Stranger Things franchise, and I want to talk about it because Eddie Munson was always going to die. Always. Disclaimer, writing is subjective. What I think a writer gets away with and what you think a writer gets away with are going to be different things. Debate is great as long as we're being respectful. And to put forth my credibility, I have a bachelor's degree in creative writing with minors in world religions and game designs, which means that I have a major in storytelling, and that's about it. I didn't like Divergent, the book series by Veronica Roth. In fact, I donated my copy to the Hurricane Irma book drive on my college campus because I figured some teenager down there looking for something to do might like a popular YA book to read, because it was just collecting dust on my shelf because I really, really grew to hate the series. It's a weak story riding on the coattails of The Hunger Games being a genuinely profound book that I think everyone should read at least once. Divergent has a messy world building, arbitrary systems in place that when you break them down don't make sense. Trust me, I did it on another video and concluded that Eric, like the sadistic villain, caricature of a villain bad guy, should have gotten Amity, which is the nice guy group, for his placement test, following the train of logic of what I could parse out of Veronica's world building. But even though Divergent isn't my cup of tea, I respect Veronica Roth for doing what so many writers, including the writers for Stranger Things, are afraid to do. She killed off her main character. Even if Tris dying was forced and didn't make sense and is also obvious from the fact that Allegiant is the only book that was dual perspective, it's still one of the few stories where the main character is just dead and gone. I say dead and gone because some characters die and then come back, and sometimes death isn't the end of the narrative because they get to be a ghost or something. But dead and gone meaning they're out of the story completely. Gone. Donezo. Another example of this is Jasper Jordan from the 100, who is like my character development poster boy, because Jasper did not shrug off war crimes and trauma like they were ugly sweaters like other characters in the main cast of the 100 does, mainly Octavia and Clark. Yet, even though my poster boy is in the 100, the show suffers the same apprehensiveness as Stranger Things. The show becomes too scared to kill off its major characters, as seen as when Octavia's arc was leading towards her death, and instead of giving us a thematic close to Octavia, we got 2 more seasons I didn't watch because, like all good shows, the networks never know how to let them die. They just let them spiral and decay into monsters that look in the mirror and can't recognize themselves for what they once were. That's our problem with the Duffer Brothers' Stranger Things. They're just too scared to to kill off their main characters. The kinds of stories I'm referring to are like the heavy narrative-driven series, TV shows, books, series, game series, not problem of the week shows kind of like The Good Doctor or Criminal Minds, or standalones, because standalone novels and standalone games can't really utilize this tool, at least not very well. These are stories like Percy Jackson and Game of Thrones, long-standing series where characters come and go. What most of these kinds of stories do as they dive further into the series is that they invite new characters into the story that will be eventually killed off because the writers don't want to kill off anyone in the inner circle of characters that make up the core of the story. Stranger Things does this more than once. Bob Newby, Joyce's boyfriend in season 2, is a character that's introduced to die, but there's a distinct difference between Bob Newby and Eddie Munson for me, because I was sad when Bob Newby died, but I knew Eddie was dying the moment I realized he was a reoccurring character. I was genuinely, like I said, I was so confused why so many people were on social media sort of talking about the sadness of his death and really attaching to him, because I mean, wasn't it obvious from the beginning? Providing death fodder, which is introducing a character to be killed to avoid killing your main cast, is a writing tool that at its best is invisible and effective, and at worst is glaringly obvious and frustrating like every writing tool out there. This is my theory. The more the writing team uses death fodder, and the more they have commitment issues with character death, the more obvious death fodder characters become. Which means that Eddie's death is only predictable because of the choices made all the way back in season 2 and compounding by the choices made in seasons 3 and 4. Seasons 2 death fodder was Bob. Seasons 3 death fodder was Billie and Dr. Alexi. Seasons 4 death fodder was Chrissy and Eddie. But Chrissy gets a soft pass because she's like an inciting incident like Barb from season 1. Now, Stranger Things can get away with death fodder because the major cast is in fact children. But to argue against that, there's also an adult cast that could just be killed off. For me, I think the Duffer Brothers' commitment issues with Jim Hopper's death is what sets Eddie up for predictability and therefore failure. The moment the writer does a poorly thought out death fake out, it teaches the audience that the writers are interested in the emotional damage of main character death, but don't want to actually commit to it. Moving forward, you assume that all characters in the inner circle make up the core of the cast won't be killed, but anyone else is fair game, especially all of the new characters introduced in new installments. I use the term inner circle not just to refer to the main cast, but specifically to refer to characters who won't be killed off because the writers are too scared to. And this circle doesn't become apparent until there's either the first fake-out death, which teaches us that there is a circle, or a lack of death from the original cast members in favor for characters killed in their introductory season, both which Stranger Things is guilty of. When an inner circle becomes clear, almost everyone from the first installment of the story, be it book 1, season 1, movie 1, game 1, is in the inner circle because they're the longest standing characters and have the most people rooting for them. Characters that come in during next installments don't typically enter the inner circle until they survive the season, game, book / movie that they're introduced in. So Max was never going to die to Vecna because she survived all of season 2 and therefore entered the inner circle. Same goes for Erica and Robin in season 3. And I don't know if anyone entered the inner circle in season 4. It's been a while. But that's what makes Jim Hopper's fake out so damaging to storytelling, because some of us have become self-aware to the fact that there is an inner circle immune to death. I feel like his death was so contrived and campy. I genuinely couldn't believe it was real because season 3 Stranger Things is astoundingly ridiculous with its Russian plotline, when MK Ultra is far more interesting than the Red Scare hysteria. The Stargate project is also another project by the US government trying to test out psychics and their abilities that could have been cooler than just Russia. Especially because I'm pretty sure Stargate was a response from footage of a Russian woman stopping the heartbeat of a frog. I'm pretty sure that's what started either Project Stargate or MK Ultra. Crazy things that the United States has put money into, but instead we just went with evil Russians, which just feels insulting at this point. Not only was Jim Hopper's death a fake out and ridiculous, I think if he stayed dead, I could have forgiven the Russian plotline, but his fake out death does so much damage, and the most damage it does is it tells us that there's an inner circle of characters who have plot armor, right? They do. No one in the main cast is gonna get killed, and I'm kind of okay with none of the kids dying, right? Because, like, they're children. I'm not really fascinated by children death. I'm an American, right? I see it every day on the news. I constantly see young children dying, defending the Second Amendment right when they can't even vote. It's horrifying out here. So I'm not really leaping to look for it. So when I'm talking about this, you know, I'm okay that the kids aren't dying, but there is an adult cast, and I feel like that you can pick them off, and, you know, things like that. Here are my thoughts on a death fake out. 9 out of 10 times a death fake out is not good. It's very difficult to sell your audience on exactly why you showed them a death and then made them go through all that emotional damage, and then surprise, they're actually alive. I think this might be controversial, but in Supernatural, when Sam dies the first time, he's brought back because of a deal Dean makes with a Crossroads demon. And then later those consequences come back to collect. That's interesting storytelling because of the world Supernatural takes place in, and it's one of the few moments that, like, a fake out death is done well because the world building supports it. So as much as I am ragging on death fake outs, I want to put it out in the universe that if you put in the work, you can pull it off. A writer can write anything that they can get away with. I don't think they got away with Jim Hoffer's fake out death because it was just like, feel sad, surprise, he's alive, and it was insulting. Eddie Munson. Eddie Munson. The audacity of Eddie Munson's death is what fueled my rage enough to finally make a video on it. As a writer myself, I was intellectually insulted that the Duffer Brothers made a poor attempt to set up an incredibly complex character motivation in such a short time period and then expected me to feel sad that this rushed character has to die. Like, on his deathbed, Eddie says something to the effect of, I didn't run away this time, right? Like, I stayed, I was the hero. Eddie wanted to feel like he was doing something meaningful, and it opens a dialogue between the differences of dying because you know your death to preserve something has value, and dying because you think your death is the only thing of value you have to offer. And that's a good story arc. But the Duffer Brothers did not give it enough time to manifest. We don't spend enough time with Eddie because his I'm always running problem in the context of the season is very reasonable because he's running from monsters and people who want to literally harm him. Like, it's not like he's running from commitment or friends or anything. He's running legitimately for his life the entire time. So you're like, yeah, you're running, but it's very rational. Running is a very rational thing to do for you, Eddie. Steve Harrington should have died here. His character arc is set up that it could have concluded in season 4. He can't seem to get a girlfriend. Nancy seems interested, but also not interested. Steve works at a video store and doesn't know what he's doing with his life. He's set up to also be looking for purpose and meaning, so dying to buy time seems like a reasonable place to kill him off, and it would be emotionally devastating because we've been with Steve for so long. It would also clear up the stupid love triangle, but that's just icing on the cake. I hated the love triangle in season 4, and I am typically not a fan of love triangles because there's no stakes in it. Oh, I have to pick between two guys, and then it's not a real choice. Like, she's like, the love triangle is like, do you continue dating your boyfriend or you dump him from someone else? And it's like, that's not very interesting because every love triangle is like that. Oh my goodness, like, Nancy was just Alaska this season in Looking for Alaska. It was insane. So I think Steve should have died. And here's the thing, Eddie's character can then step in and fill the role that Steve leaves behind. You know, Eddie feels like a screw-up who runs away, and everyone has fallen apart because of Steve's death. Eddie knew him the least, so it makes sense that Eddie would be the one to force everyone to get on their feet and keep them moving. Even if characters despise Eddie for it in the moment, when everything calms down, the cast can show that appreciation, that without Eddie, everyone would have died because they couldn't process Steve's death. And then with that, Eddie would then enter the inner circle of the core cast. I feel like that would have been more interesting in the long run. That Eddie is sort of taking up the older brother, that aspect that Steve leaves behind in his death. The one that Nancy's boyfriend, I can't remember his name. I want to say it's Zach, but I think that's wrong. He fails to be that older brother constantly. I feel like I feel like it all went wrong on Hopper's death. Like, Hopper's death could have also taught the audience that no one is safe. Many people expect the main cast to make it out alive, which is why death fodder characters typically aren't so obvious. You know, I didn't look at Bob and Billie and think, oh, they're gonna die, like I had with Eddie. And I want to emphasize that almost all stories and series do this. Like, they introduce characters in their next installments who die. It's just a basic tool of storytelling, because you want to have your readers go through the grieving process of death of a fictional character, but you're not quite ready to let one of your main characters go. It's a good tool. But so many TV shows, movies, they just do these fake outs because they want... It's manipulative. It's really manipulative that they want you to feel this pain without actually having to do it. And it's so frustrating, and I hate it so much. And I feel like I honestly feel like Eddie would have had a better shot for me if Jim Hopper hadn't been a death fake out, and then also if they didn't constantly use death fodder characters. Like, they never want to kill anyone off in the main cast, and that's a tragedy, because you can't have a story like Stranger Things and not kill people. That's the problem. This is a story about monsters. Like, Barb in season 1 was so good because, you know, we didn't see a lot of Barb, but we saw enough of her that, like, her death was intense. And we felt it through Nancy, right? Because Nancy was her best friend, and it comes on into season 2. That was a great thing about Nancy's character, and a lot of respect for the Duffer Brothers, is that they didn't have Nancy just forget about Barb across seasons. She really took a lot of time to really get over Barb's death, and then she felt like there was some justice with the way that she handles with the conspiracy theorist, that Barb has gotten some justice, that she has been found, and that there's closure to that. We went on that whole journey, and that's why Barb was so successful as a character death. But then in the next seasons, it's Bob, which Bob is a free pass because he's our first death fodder character. So no one's going to notice it because he's our first. The next one is Billie, and Billie was kind of a villain throughout all of his whole season, so we don't feel as bad. We feel bad because Max has a breakdown. So we don't actually feel bad on our own, because Billie is just a comical mullet villain. Part of the appeal of the original Stranger Things was that this was a story about boys who play Dungeons and Dragons, and the world of Dungeons and Dragons kind of coming to life. Because it's not that it's really coming to life. It's the boys sort of, they're using their language of Dungeons and Dragons to understand the unknown. You know, they call the Upside Down the I forget what it is. It's the opposite of the Feywild. It's the Shadowfell. They don't really understand what the Upside Down is, but they have the language of Dungeons and Dragons, and they can place the Shadowfell on top of that. You know, the Demogorgon, it is just the best match from their monster manual, right? Like, it's interesting, and it's cool, and it's fascinating to see this sort of horror twist on what if the monsters from these games were real, and what if they were just around doing things like this. That was cool, and it was sci-fi, and it was interesting, and then it was also a timepiece, and that was cool and interesting, and then it just started getting worse. I think season 2 was great. It was so interesting what they did with season 2, and then season 3 is when I really started feeling like it just went off the rails, and then season 4 was just a nightmare. I feel like I've rambled enough. Eddie Munson was always gonna die. It was so obvious, and I hope that the Duffer Brothers do better in their next intellectual property, that you don't do fake out deaths, and that you actually commit to the kind of storytelling that you want to commit, and you don't turn characters into commercialized products. That's what Eddie felt like. He felt like a product by the end of it, with how much social media attention he was getting and the club t-shirts and all of this stuff. And I hope that they do better, because season 4 was a mess. And that's a shame, because season 1 and the original idea was so good.